enjoyable listening to this. Benny Hinn was into what we would call word of faith stuff, where some really radical extreme stuff of God being lower than us, or God being lower, man being more exalted, a focus on man, manifesting things, making things happen by speaking them, believing in them, creating them yourself because you have faith. It's great denunciation of that theology. But remember, we know something now with 11 years of history from this interview. He hasn't changed anything. He continues to do the exact same thing. He looks straight at Pat Robertson. He looks into the camera, and what you're going to hear is good teaching right now. I mean, he's about as sincere as, I sure could use a simile right now.
Pat, all of us have to grow. Sure. And all of us have to look at things again that we've believed. The earlier days of my life when I began preaching, as I said, to you already, were influenced by Miss Kuhlman, people like Corrie ten Boom. The books I read in those days were people like Finney and Pink and a lot of the greats of the past that are well known.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that great? This is an interesting place to stop. Benny Hinn saying, I read people like Finney. Okay, we can argue about some of Finney's stuff, but nonetheless, theologically, lots of good stuff. A.W. Pink is who he said Pink. A.W. Pink is who he's referring to. He's a Puritan boy, rock solid teaching. Showing again, I don't think that we can say that any of these people are trying to be hoodwinkers. They are sincerely deceived themselves, and they are sincerely deceiving others. I do not believe that it is our job, I don't think it's biblical, to judge the intentions of false teachers. We can simply judge what they say, what they do. Motive, we have to leave that to God. And I think this is just further proof, just like we've heard about with Jim Baker. This guy probably started out great, reading A.W. Pink, wonderful stuff. And now he's knocking people over by blowing on them. I guess we've got three options now. It's either the power of suggestion, it's the devil, or he just needs a breath ashore.
And then in the early 80s, when I moved to Orlando in 79, and in the early 80s I began my church. And, as a pastor, you need materials every Sunday. Mm-hmm. Sadly, in those days, I began looking into the teaching known today as the faith prosperity teaching. In those days, it was widely accepted. Some of the things that are being taught now were not taught then. Mainly back then, the confession teaching was strong and things like this. Today, the faith message has gone a little too far.
What is it saying, and what were you saying with the faith message?
Well, actually, what began to happen, Pat, is in the last few years, I began teaching things that really began to cause me problems, such as the little gods doctrine.
What's the little gods doctrine? Oh, glad you asked.
God came from heaven, became a man, made man into little gods, went back to heaven as a man. He faces the Father as a man. I face devils as the Son of God.
So in other words, you're just a little god.
When you say, I'm a Christian, you're saying, I am Mashiach in the Hebrew. I'm a little Messiah walking on earth, in other words.
All right, nice confession. Nice confession from Benny, exposing the problems with the word of faith, the emphasis on faith. Let's continue to listen, knowing that he's lying. Or he's sincere, but he didn't follow through with any of this, as we'll hear in a bit.
What was
that? This is a well accepted teaching today in many circles, where really the focus has been taken off Jesus, in my opinion, yes. With this. Like with any truth, when truth is presented often, if it's not kept balanced, it can go way off and become error.
That's correct.
And that's what's happened here. Where faith now, suddenly it's no longer Jesus, the author of faith. It's faith, and Jesus is nowhere in it.
Might I inject a word to pastors? And, well, frankly, I guess to any Christian. In the beginning of this interview with Pat Robertson said about Benny Hinn, great brother in the Lord and great minute, whatever, ringing endorsement. And then throughout this interview, we're hearing how stunned Pat Robertson is that Benny was actually teaching the little God, the I'm a Mashiach theology. Pastor, before you endorse anybody, Christian, before you endorse anybody and say, ooh, that's a good preacher, you do well to really find out what they're up to. These days, oh boy, you've got people printing up books, you've got people cranking out videos, you've got people doing programs. You better find out an awful lot before you throw your name behind them, because you could find yourself like Pat Robertson going, ugh, yikes.
Where it's faith in faith rather than faith in God.
I hear you. All right.
And when Jesus is taken out, you'll have disasters. And sadly, a lot of precious people have been misled by this. The little God's doctrine, which is a part of the... When you say the faith message today, you're no longer talking about confession only. You're talking about way more than confession.
What are you talking about?
You're talking about Jesus dying spiritually. You're talking about the little God's doctrine. You're talking about...
Tell me this little gods. We are little gods. That is, I said you're gods unto whom the word of God came. Is that it or more?
Yeah, no, it's gone a little farther than that.
It's gone way farther.
God came from heaven, became a man, made man into little gods.
That's the little God doctrine.
Other than that?
Yes, sir. It's become where you depend on self.
Come on.
You are your own boss. It's like I said, the focus comes off Jesus onto you. It's no longer dying to self. It's no longer crucifying self. It's no longer letting Jesus be
the
head. Yeah. You become your own man.
Listen, I mean, Benny's got it. There's not a lot of preachers today that talk about dying to self. Benny did read A.W. Pink. He did read Finney. I'll bet he read Spurgeon and Tozer, any of the Jonathan Edwards. I wonder if he was reading his Bible a lot, but nonetheless, he's got it right. Just, I wonder if Benny himself had ever repented and put his trust in Jesus Christ. Motives, don't know, but boy, is this boy off the track.
Controlling your future, it's all me and self. I heard a man say years ago that he looked in the mirror every day and told himself how great he was. And that was a well-known preacher. And he told me that privately.
Well, I look in the mirror and I tell myself what a great sinner I am and how I don't deserve anything, you know?
But you see, Pat, what has sadly happened to me and happens with many and is happening with many still is they forget it's not by might nor by power but by my spirit.
Sure.
Self becomes the all-important one.
Well, what about this of course, this business about Jesus dying spiritually is an absolute heresy. There's no such thing in the Bible that indicates Jesus was the Son of God. God doesn't die. God doesn't die spiritually. That's nonsense. Right. He died physically, and then he was raised again. His body died.
Exactly right. But you see, back to what I was saying earlier,
all right.
when you take Jesus out and you put everything on self, then suddenly you become the important one.
Yeah.
And
as you listen to this, you're thinking, boy, the next time Benny shows up, he's going to be a Bible-banging preacher. To the contrary, he's still up to his tricks, and we're going to hear that at 5 o'clock when Ole Anthony joins us. Also, can't pursue this today. Would love to, but we can't pursue this thought today. Based on what Benny just said, I was deceived and deceiving. Well, he didn't go as far as saying deceiving, but he was tricked. He had fallen off the track. Right there, Benny should have said, he should be done. He should be done. 1 Timothy 3 has lost his ability to be a preacher, although I'm not sure where he got his theology degree or who ordained him, but nonetheless, he should have been done. Right there. But it doesn't seem to work that way anymore. You get yourself a TV show, you call yourself a pastor, I guess you're a pastor.
You want to bring Jesus down to your level rather than you coming to his level. Mm-hmm. And what happened with me is the influence changed on my life for a few years. And influence is strong, very strong. The Bible says one sinner destroyeth much good. Just one man can influence someone to go the wrong way.
I think he's misquoting, well, I mean, sort of quoting wrong. 1 Corinthians, is it 15? A bad company corrupts good character, I think.
And we young preachers, listening to the preachers that have been known for so long to be great preachers, and if these men say something, you say, oh, that must be God. You begin teaching it, then you see the emptiness of it. A dear lady, whom I have known for years and years and years, a Lutheran dear lady, who was born again, filled with the Holy Spirit, began a very balanced Christian life, like most people do, began listening to this teaching. It got so bad where I was in her house one day with my wife, and I said, oh, look at your skin, you're bleeding all over. And she said, she actually said this, she said,